Well, Georgia on My Mind is another song that I'm revisiting. I've recorded this a number of times. The first recording I did of this was on an album I made called Artistry that Steve Howe produced, and it was probably it wasn't the very first completely solo album I made. I made one before that called Sketches, about 1984, 1985. But this album, which I think was about 93, Artistry, the record label let me do it because they thought it wouldn't sell anything, and I didn't think it would sell very many either, but it would be a little thing that for myself I thought would be good to do. But it turned out to be the recording that got me noticed, got me on the map as a solo player, as it were. And I played this song, Georgia on My Mind, and it's been transcribed a number of times by different people. And I've actually had a few problems because I never play anything the same way twice. Sometimes I'll get guitar players come up to me and they say, I've got this that transcription of Georgia on My Mind is wrong because it doesn't match the version at all. And that's because it's a transcription of another version. So I always have to try and explain that I never play anything twice. So if you ever see any of my transcriptions, just think of them as being a guide. They're not. It's not carved in stone. Yeah. So this is another revisit. Again, always evolving. In fact, whenever I play this, it is always completely different. I just go for it, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. Sometimes when you play something, you get into it after about, certainly within 8 bars, it starts to develop a kind of energy of its own, and you know what it's going to be. And sometimes I'll go, oh, this one's going to be special. Other times I'll go, I haven't quite got the energy going here with this. Then I might fall back a little bit on an arrangement, or I'll kind of hark back to some of the other versions that I've done, see if I can remember some of the things that I played on that. But usually I like to just let it evolve and see what happens, and that's what I did this version. I mean, this is a one-off version. I've never played it like this before, and I will never ever play it like this again. Now, Hoagy Carmichael wrote this. He wrote such great music. He wrote this, believe it or not, he wrote this in 1930. It's just timeless. It just that's why everybody just continues recording it. Of course, Ray Charles did you could call the definitive version of this. Absolutely amazing version. All the lyricists, by the way, Hoagy Carmichael. Now I can't remember whether Hoagy Carmichael wrote the music or the lyrics to this. I'm not sure, but the co-writer is Stuart Gorell. Also, now Ray Charles did a very famous version of this, or with a number, in fact, over the years, and we always associate this song with him. And of course, he was a native of Georgia. That was his home state, so that was very important to him. However, something a lot of people don't realize is that Hoagy Carmichael didn't write this for or about the state of Georgia. He wrote it for his sister. His sister's name was Georgia. So I just thought I'd give that little bit of trivia if you're doing a pub quiz sometime, that it was actually not written for the state of Georgia. It was written for Hoagy Carmichael's sister, Georgia. Now, Georgie Fame, wonderful singer, B3 organist, and friend of mine, a fellow Rhythm King. We were both in Bill Wyman's group, Rhythm Kings, when Bill Wyman left the Rolling Stones and formed his group. Georgie Fame and I were both in the band, and this was a feature that we used to do together. All the band used to go off, and Georgie and I used to do Georgia on My Mind. And again, it was always different. It was never the same every time. We never knew where it was going to go. You could speak to anybody in the band and speak to Bill, anyone that was in that band at the time. Albert Lee was in the group, Gary Brooker. They will always tell you it was never the same. It was always different. But Georgie Fame tells a really nice story. The BBC Radio asked Georgie to go to California to interview Hoagy Carmichael, then knowing that he was such a huge fan of his, and did a radio interview talking about his life. And Georgie said it was great. He went into Hoagie Carmichael's house. Hoagie Carmichael, he opened a bottle of bourbon, and they sat down, had a drink, and Georgie asked him stories, and Hoagie Carmichael was a great talker, and he just went on telling all these wonderful stories about his life. When Georgie was leaving, Hoagie Carmichael didn't know who Georgie Fame was. He'd been told that he was a well-known singer and jazz musician and blues artist, but he didn't know who he was. And as George is leaving, and they're saying their goodbyes, and Hoagie Carmichael turns to George and he says, I don't know what you sing like, he said, but when you sing my songs, you're always going to sound great.